Imagine a night so dark that it swallowed the world. A time before the sun had even thought of rising. A night when legends are born, not in the light of day, but in the chaos of a pre-dawn raid that left no witnesses, only the echoes of its destruction. Now imagine that one of the deadliest Viking raids went down so quickly and suddenly that no one was able to tell the tale. So swift that it disappeared in the blink of an eye, leaving only a shadow behind. And what if I told you that this attack, this singular moment in Viking history, was not a perfect plan, but a devastating storm of chaos, unpreparedness, and fear? A story buried deep in the folds of time. But today, we'll bring it to light. In this video, we'll dive deep into one of the most mysterious and unspoken Viking raids of all time. A raid that left no trace, no witnesses, and no official record. We'll uncover the chaos behind the raid, why it happened when it did, and how the Vikings, known for their preparation and brutality, were undone by the very thing they least expected: complete, utter disorder. Was it the result of a failed plan? Or was it the reckless force of Viking chaos? And why has history stayed silent about this raid? Stay with us, because what we're about to uncover will change everything you think you know about the Vikings. Before we dive deeper into this astonishing story, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on more untold chapters from the wild and mysterious past of the Vikings. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. It's the 9th century, the Viking Age, a time of legendary conquests, raiding expeditions, and epic battles. The Vikings were known for their incredible naval skills, striking fear into kingdoms across Europe. Their long ships, sleek and fast, could navigate even the roughest seas, allowing them to strike with terrifying precision. A well-oiled war machine, or so it seemed. But behind the myth of the organized and strategic Viking raiders, there was another side to their culture, one that was far more chaotic. A side where preparation took a back seat to the thrill of the moment. The Vikings thrived on unpredictability, and this particular raid was no exception. Viking raids weren't always as perfectly planned as the sagas would have us believe. Yes, they were fierce warriors, but like any group of men, or any force of nature, things didn't always go according to plan. Sometimes it was the sheer unpredictability of their strikes that made them so deadly. Chaos, rather than careful strategy, often led them to victory. The raid we're about to discuss wasn't your typical Viking assault. It was rushed, chaotic, and dangerously impulsive, a nightmare for those who thought they were prepared. And it all began before dawn. The stage is set. Viking raids were often meticulously planned, but there was an underlying sense of urgency to this one. This wasn't a carefully executed campaign. This was a strike driven by something far more unpredictable. Necessity, perhaps, or a sudden opportunity. The decision to strike before dawn wasn't made by the usual cautious minds of Viking leaders, but by the recklessness of a moment. The weeks leading up to this raid were full of whispers and hurried decisions. The Vikings knew they were heading into unknown territory, but the target was tempting. The locals, perhaps unaware of the imminent danger, had been lax in their defenses. They hadn't prepared, and neither did the Vikings, not in the way they usually would. This raid would be different. The Vikings weren't able to gather the typical resources, the carefully crafted weapons, the support of a larger fleet, or even time to properly plan their attack. But they had one thing on their side: their long ships, fast and nimble, ready to strike before the first light of day. It was in the chaos of these early hours that the Vikings saw an opportunity. The enemy had let their guard down, assuming that the night was their shield. They had no idea that the Vikings would strike under the cover of darkness, with no warning. There was no time to prepare, no time to rally defenses. The Vikings had the upper hand, not because of their might, but because they had caught the enemy completely off guard. But this raid wasn't about cold, calculated precision. It was about the element of surprise. And when that surprise gave way to confusion, things quickly spiraled out of control. As the longships glided silently across the water, the first rays of light barely touching the horizon, the Vikings were already preparing for the chaos that was about to unfold. The night was still thick, and the moon barely visible as the ships neared the coastline. They were ready to strike, or so they thought. The plan was simple: land quickly, overwhelm the defenders, and retreat before the sun could rise fully. But the unexpected happened. The elements of the raid quickly became uncontrollable. With the first clash of weapons, everything they thought they knew about this attack began to unravel. The first few moments were marked by complete confusion. The Viking warriors, usually known for their discipline and organization, found themselves overwhelmed by the disarray of the situation. Some ships had arrived earlier than planned, others had been delayed. It was chaotic, and in the frenzy of battle, the lines between the attackers and the defenders began to blur. For the enemy, this was a nightmare. Not only were they faced with an unexpected assault, but they had no time to organize themselves. The raid was so disjointed that the defenders, who had hoped to put up a fight, instead found themselves caught in the same chaotic spiral. The Vikings, as aggressive as they were, didn't know what was happening either. Their usual tactics were drowned in confusion, but they kept fighting, driven by instinct, by the sheer chaos of the moment. The Vikings had always relied on their ability to adapt, to thrive in the chaos of battle. But this time, the chaos was too much even for them. The initial moments of the raid became a tangle of miscommunication, frenzied fighting, and brutal improvisation. In the heart of the chaos, the Vikings began to realize that something had gone terribly wrong. The disorganization wasn't just affecting the defenders, it was affecting them too. The usual Viking tactics of speed, strength, and strategic strikes had been rendered useless. They couldn't control the situation, and it became clear that this raid wasn't going to go as planned. At the core of the raid, there was a sense of desperation. The Vikings were used to being the ones in control, but now they were scrambling. The initial shock of their attack had given them an advantage, but as the minutes turned into hours, they began to lose it. The enemy, caught off guard at first, now had time to recover, and they fought back with a fierceness that took the Vikings by surprise. One of the most startling aspects of this raid was how the Vikings were forced to react. They were so used to being the predators, but this time they were just as caught in the web of chaos as their enemies. The carefully crafted plan had fallen apart, and all that was left was survival. As the fighting escalated, it became clear that this raid wouldn't end with a victory. The confusion, the lack of preparation, and the overwhelming chaos had created a battlefield that was beyond control. The Vikings weren't just losing ground, they were losing the fight itself. This was a far cry from the tales of glorious Viking raids. This was the raw reality of battle, unpredictable, unforgiving, and chaotic. And for the first time, the Vikings were the ones caught in it. As the sun began to rise, casting its first light on the battlefield, the chaos of the night seemed to fade into a grim silence. The Vikings, accustomed to victory, found themselves surrounded by the wreckage of their own disorganization. The raid, which was supposed to be a swift and devastating strike, had turned into a disaster. The defenders, though initially caught off guard, had managed to rally and push the invaders back. But what made this raid so unsettling wasn't just the outcome. It was the fact that it was over almost before anyone had the chance to fully comprehend it. The Vikings had vanished as quickly as they had come, leaving behind only the broken remnants of a failed mission. The enemy had been given a chance to regroup and defend their land, and yet no one could truly explain what had happened. There were no survivors from the Viking side who could recount the full story. No eyewitness accounts, no recorded history of the raid that had happened under the cover of darkness. All that remained were the whispers of an attack that had gone terribly wrong. The chaos of the raid seemed to consume everyone, and in the end, it left no one to tell the tale. Historians and chroniclers have speculated about the aftermath. Perhaps it was a deliberate attempt to erase the evidence of the Vikings' failure. Maybe it was the overwhelming chaos that led the attackers to abandon their mission, knowing there was no way to salvage it. Or perhaps there were other forces at play, forces that, like the Vikings, had not been prepared for what the raid unleashed. What's certain is that the consequences of this failed raid rippled through the Viking world. It wasn't just a matter of losing a battle. It was the loss of the legendary certainty that had surrounded Viking raids for centuries. The Vikings were not invincible. They were not immune to the unpredictability of war. And this raid, this complete breakdown of order, would change the way future raids were carried out. In the end, the absence of a clear narrative about what had transpired left this raid to be consumed by myth and speculation. Those who had lived through it either refused to speak of it, or they were simply lost to history, swept away by the chaos they had created. And with them, the story of what truly happened was lost. So, what exactly happened that night? Why was there no clear record of this raid? Why did the Vikings, known for their ruthless efficiency, fail so dramatically? Over the years, historians have proposed various theories, but none have been able to answer these questions definitively. One theory suggests that the Vikings may have been affected by internal strife or division among their leaders. Perhaps there was a lack of coordination or a breakdown in the chain of command, which caused the raid to become disorganized and chaotic. It's possible that the usual unity that made Viking raids so successful simply didn't exist that night. Another theory points to the possibility that the Vikings were caught off guard by the terrain or the strength of the defenders. They may have underestimated their enemies or miscalculated their attack, leading them into a situation where they couldn't adapt in time. The unexpected nature of the battle, with both sides scrambling to respond, only deepened the confusion. Some even speculate that there may have been supernatural elements at play, that the Viking gods themselves had turned their backs on the raiders, or that the raid had angered them in some way. Viking sagas often attribute the outcome of battles to divine favor or wrath, and perhaps this failed raid was seen as a punishment for their reckless and impulsive actions. But perhaps the simplest explanation is that the chaos itself was the real enemy. The Vikings had relied on their ability to adapt to chaos, but on this night, it overtook them. The confusion, the lack of preparation, and the unexpected nature of the attack created a storm of chaos that no one, not even the Vikings, could control. Ultimately, the mystery surrounding this raid has only fueled more questions than answers. Why was it never recorded? Why did the Vikings disappear so quickly? And why did no one survive to tell the tale? The answers may never be fully known, but what's clear is that this raid changed the course of Viking history. It shattered the illusion that their raids were unstoppable and revealed a vulnerability that no one had anticipated. The legacy of this mysterious raid is one of silence, the silence of unanswered questions and lost histories. The Vikings were not invincible. They were not immune to failure. And this raid, unlike so many others, was one that had no heroic tale, no songs sung in honor of its victors, and no sagas written to remember it by. But the legacy doesn't end there. This raid, more than any other, would set the tone for future Viking expeditions. It would remind the Viking warriors that chaos, while often a weapon in their favor, could also be their greatest downfall. The raid that left no witnesses became a turning point in their tactics and their understanding of war. As the years passed, the Vikings became more calculated in their raids, less willing to rely on impulsive strikes. The lessons learned from the chaos of this raid were passed down to future generations, shaping the way Viking warriors approached their enemies. No longer could they afford to assume that victory was guaranteed, that the chaos of battle would always be in their favor. In a way, this failed raid became one of the most important lessons in Viking history. It was a reminder that even the most feared warriors could be defeated, not by strength, but by the very unpredictability that made them so terrifying in the first place. As we look back on this strange and mysterious chapter of Viking history, we're reminded of the unpredictable nature of war. The Vikings, for all their fearsome reputation, were not immune to failure. This raid, though largely forgotten, holds a powerful lesson in the balance between preparation and chaos. What do you think happened that night? Was it a simple mistake, or was there something more at play? We may never know the full story, but the legend of this mysterious raid continues to haunt the pages of history. If you found this story intriguing, don't forget to hit subscribe. There are countless untold tales from Viking history waiting to be uncovered, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. The Viking dawn that left no witnesses may have faded into the shadows, but its legacy lives on. Thank you for joining us in uncovering this hidden story. Until next time, stay curious.